On today's podcast, we are joined by a fellow internet radio man. Welcome to Tabletop Shop. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Tabletop Shop podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Cody Pennington, and today we are joined by another special guest. This guest is well known in the board game community for his Five Games For Doomsday podcast, as well as his recent Design Notes series as featured on the Dice Tower, and a variety of other audio ventures. Please welcome to the shop, Mr. Ben Maddox. Ben, it's a pleasure to have you on the show, sir.
Yeah, I almost jumped over your line there. Hi.
Hey, that's fine. You know, I need to work on my intros there, because I always say the person's name, and then I give this awkward pause, almost just hoping for something weird to happen.
It's fine. The beauty of doing this beforehand is you can edit out the pause, but the problem is with talking about the pause means you have to leave it in now.
Oh,
so
no.
you're contractually obliged.
I've just broken everything now, haven't I? Well, let's get down to this. Ben, you live in Germany, as I understand it, right?
I do.
But you've lived in other countries as well.
Well, I'm English, so I've lived in England.
Yeah.
I've lived in Wales, which is also another country. The Welsh will demand that you say that. And I've also lived in Austria, so I've lived in, that's 4 countries up until this point.
Okay. Would you like to describe for us your journey of residency, as it were? Like what brought you to each place?
Well, I was born in England, in the middle of nowhere. I've just got back from a trip, actually. I haven't been back to my hometown for like 6 years, and so I was engaging in one of those hugely nostalgic, sort of damp-eyed returns, and I had to walk around and saw my old haunts and all that sort of gubbins. And then I studied in Wales. I studied acting in Wales. And then, because, Britain is a post-apocalyptic hellscape a la Mad Max, I decided to leave the country. And
excellent.
Ended up in Austria because I have friends there. And then I was in Vienna for 8 years, and Vienna's a lovely place, but it's a village. It's a village of 1.5 million people, and I felt a sort of little constrained there, and I didn't want to go back to England, aforementioned sort of roaming gangs of people looking for potatoes in the street and everything. So I thought I'd go somewhere. I speak German, so I thought I'd go to Berlin, and this is where I find myself now.
So when did you learn German then, that gave you that experience for living in Germany?
When I moved to Austria. So I went to Austria with no German whatsoever, and it just sort of sunk in by a process of osmosis, I guess.
Learning by immersion, right?
Yeah. Now,
I've tried to learn... I say try to learn. I have worked on learning German a little bit over time using the classic Duolingo app.
Okay, yeah. I tried to learn Turkish with that. Did nothing for me.
Some people find it helpful. Some people prefer the old Rosetta Stone approach. I'm not sure. I was actually learning Japanese for a while, but it gets all sorts of confusing because they have like multiple syllabaries or alphabets that you have to learn.
Right.
It's very confusing.
Yeah, it's an absolute nightmare. I mean, German's an absolute nightmare, and German's one of the simpler languages. But basically, the thing is, I've grown up in my life not caring one iota if I come across as an idiot. I think the big problem with adults learning languages is they want to get it right because they don't want to appear stupid, and that's never been an issue for me. So I just plow on ahead and hope that people understand what I'm saying.
I really respect that. I wish I had that self-confidence to just make a fool of myself and learn in the process.
It's not self-confidence. I'm massively unself-confident. It's just a recognition I am a buffoon. And so it doesn't hinder me in talking.
Maybe that is just a recognition that we all need to make at some point in our lives.
Absolutely.
Well, it's good that you ended up in Germany, because as the birthplace of Eurogames, and perhaps even modern gaming itself, it must just be a delight to be living there.
It's crazy. It's crazy in many different ways, because gaming seems... Now, I live in Berlin, and the thing you have to understand about Germany is Berlin is not Germany. It's quite unique in many kinds of ways. The way people interact, the kind of shops you get. There are these places called Spätkaufs in Berlin. These are 24-hour liquor stores, for want of a better term. And they're completely unique to Berlin. They don't exist in the rest of Germany. Berlin's a very un-German place in many ways. But what's so wonderful here about when I got into gaming, when I came to Berlin, essentially, because I was spending a lot of time in the pub and I decided I needed a hobby that would sort of gently steer me away from alcohol, you know. And so I got into games. It didn't work very well, I've got to admit. But,
okay.
But, and, you know, it feels a sort of definite built-in, baked-in part of the culture here. And in Berlin, it's great. I mean, you can get a game every night of the week if you so desire. At clubs, at people's houses, just all around. And, you know, and what's really fascinating is those Euro games, these great Euro games, you get to play them before they get over to the Anglo-Saxon world, right? And, you know, especially... Yeah. And what's so wonderful about modern German games is that I think companies strive more and more for language independence. So you can buy the German... I just bought Uwe Rosenberg's new game, Atiwa. And apart from one card that has like 4 words on it, the game's completely language independent, which is wonderful because I don't have to wait for the English version to be printed. I can buy the German version. And I play games with a lot of expats, you know, and a lot of people from different countries. And so English is the lingua franca here. And so it's great. And yeah, gaming here is absolutely fabulous. There's no better place, I don't think.
There must still be an advantage, too, in being able to speak the original language that the game is written in. I mean, I've looked through the Castles of Burgundy rulebook many a time trying to find a specific rule, and there's a couple items in there that if you go on Board Game Geek in forums, they'll explain that it's not quite written the way you think it means, and some of the rules are just a little bit different.
Yeah, it's fascinating because German's a much more kind of exact language. There's much less ambiguity in German. So often, you know, a lot of games come with multiple rule books in different languages. And that has been the case occasionally. We've read a rule and it seems ambiguous and we're not sure. And we go, let's look at the German rules. And you look at the German rules and it's, this is very, very clear. And so I recently did a job. I'm not sure. I didn't sign an NDA, I don't think. I'm not sure. I translated...
you gotta make sure,
I translated a text for Catan from German into English. And I hope that I've tried to eliminate any kind of ambiguity into the English translation because German is a very exact language.
Yeah.
And it can be very useful at times.
I would imagine so, yeah. Well, beyond that, what is the board game community like in Germany? I mean, obviously you're really close to Essen and perhaps the presentation of the Spiel des Jahres. And...
Yeah, it's hugely varied, actually. I see the sort of gripes and frustrations of American gamers, and I don't see it reflected here. And I think we can
really.
Yeah, it's funny because American culture is so... It's so engrossing and so addictive, and people. What happens in America tends to get adopted everywhere else, and people often, I think, make the mistake of assuming American issues are endemic in their own countries, and it's just not the case in many ways. And I think gaming. I mean, my game group is fascinating. It's people of all stripes, of all backgrounds, of all ages, and you know, and people of all tastes and predilections. It's a wonderful place. You can play anything, you know. You can have a game of Through the Ages, you can have a game of No Thanks in the same night with the same people or with a completely different group of people. And it's these sort of calls for diversity that you see among sort of American board game Twitter. I look at my game group and I think it's one of the most diverse groups of people I've ever been a part of, and it's a wonderful place to be, I think.
I was actually going to ask about that, since obviously Germany is known for producing Euro games. I was curious if Ameritrash war games and roll and moves or party games are played just as frequently.
Yeah, sure. I mean, one of our most popular games is Telestrations there, because it gives us an excuse to draw dirty pictures. And,
classic.
I mean, we play everything. I think, I got into gaming because I'm an actor. I got into gaming primarily through things like social deduction games, where I can use my big mouth to full effect. But through that, I got into everything, and I'm very much gaming wise into playing everything, giving everything a go. I think my happy place is midweight Eurogames, but I'll play everything. And my Thursday gaming night, you see everything being played. You see Nemesis being played. You see Uwe Rosenberg games being played. You see Telestrations. You see a lot of Social Deduction. I've recently been playing Feed the Kraken a bit, which is a fantastic game. And yeah, I kind of don't get penciling yourself away into a certain corner and saying, I only play these kinds of games, And with that comes inherent snobbery. And I think, something like No Thanks, which has 2 mechanisms, is one of the best game designs ever. And things don't need to be super complex to be super rewarding. And I think, people should play a bit of everything and say yes to everything, I think.
Sure. Yeah, I do love that about the board game community. I don't know if you really see that as much in other nerddoms or geekdoms. But like you said, I also really like midweight Euro games. That's kind of the place where I feel like I shine. But in this last year, I got to play, Quacks of Quedlinburg.
Yeah.
Just a push your luck game, and there's strategy in it, but push your luck, and that has become one of my favorite games. I would not have thought that a push your luck game would make it up so high on my list.
It's absolutely fabulous. And there are certain games, the way I kind of talk about it, I guess, is there are games that live on the table and games that live above the table. And I love things like Push Your Luck, because I think Push Your Luck has that element of living above the table. If you were alone playing that game, you might be far more risk averse than you would be in a group with people egging you on and making you, push yourself further than is sensible. And
sure.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, Quacks is an absolutely fantastic game.
Yeah, it can make for great memories too, just by, I guess, making those crazy decisions. Like, I'm going to pass on points and just take 15 rat spaces this turn. See what it does.
Right, and being rational and sensible and making the correct choice all the time is such it's such a bankrupt, dull way of living, in my view. I mean, you can be, and I think that's something that games offer, right? Social deduction games give you a safe place to lie. Push your luck games give you a safe place to be reckless. And, I think games really offer that, and they're really valuable for that, I think.
Sure. Well, Ben, you've described yourself as an actor, and in your own words, I quote, "An actor of such distinction that Google snorts at you derisively when you enter his name as a search term." Would you like to elaborate on this?
Well, I've been on stage. I did my first production when I was 5 years old, I think. So
wow.
And I think the reason I've managed to remain as an actor up until the age that I am now is because I'm absolutely useless at anything else. So I'm a bang average actor, but I'm below average at literally everything else I attempt. So it's the only thing open to me.
So by comparison, this is the place you shine.
Well, exactly. for a given definition of the word shine, of course. And I was thinking about this. I was writing a piece about Essen this week, and I want to record it for my podcast. And I was sort of talking about, being at Essen and it being a wonderful experience and all of this. And it made me think about where I'm most comfortable in life. And I think I'm most comfortable in life in an empty theatre about 2 hours before the show goes up, where I get to sit in the empty auditorium and look at the stage. And sort of have that moment of quiet contemplation before I have to go backstage and put my costume on and come on and perform. And just being in the theatre. I've been in the theatre since I was 5, and it's just, it's one of those places, I guess, that no matter what's happening in your life, the theatre is a place that centres me, and I feel very comfortable there. And so, acting when you're someone like me, a sort of low-grade actor like I am, is not a glamorous profession, and it's not a well-paid profession. But when you're working, it's the best job you can do, And so I kind of am forced into doing it simply because I'm addicted to it, I think.
What is it you think about that, just that empty theater that has such a profound effect on you?
I don't know. It's I was trying to put this into words, and I guess there's just an electric potentiality, right? You sit there, and also there's a wonderful thing about being in an empty theatre or being backstage at a theatre. If you're in a production, is that you're privy to something that most people aren't. Most people aren't allowed to sit in an empty theatre or sort of walk across an empty stage 2 hours before a production. It's a real privilege, I think, and there's a sort of feeling of there's a feeling of kind of being special, being privileged in being able to be there before the rest of the public are. Every time I'm in a restaurant and I see a door saying, staff only past this point or something, I know that you're going to walk into a white-walled room with, cleaning products on one wall and mops in the corner. But I'm always, massively sort of fascinated to know what's behind that door. I guess I want to be in places that you're not allowed to be.
Sure.
I suppose.
It's something about that exclusivity, maybe.
Exactly.
Let's backtrack just a little bit. You mentioned getting into the board game community around in the pub life there. How long have you been in Germany then?
So I've been in Germany. I moved in the end of 2011. So yeah, about 11 years now.
Okay. And has it been from that point onward that you started getting into the hobby board game community?
Yeah, I started getting into games around sort of early 2012. And yeah, as I said, it was one of those things. I was looking for something to do, and I was looking for a way. I'd moved to Germany, and I didn't know many people here, and I was looking for a way to meet people, And so I started watching Dice Tower videos, and then I bought Pandemic, and I played Pandemic, and I thought, wow, this is completely not what I assumed board games to be. This is incredible, and I was really sort of blown away. And from that sort of first play of Pandemic, I was completely hooked. And as with any obsession, I spent the next year buying altogether too many games and getting really involved in the community. And I found that there was a community, and I'd never really been a part of a community up until that point in my life at all, really, because I never really had hobbies. And yeah, I just found board gaming was a really, really fun place to be, and I still feel it, I think.
What I love about that is, as far as I've heard from most other people I've spoken to, it seems like they've either grown up playing games or a friend or a close family member introduced them to games. I love, though, that the hobby board game community is accessible enough that you can just sort of accidentally discover it on your own and then just start getting involved.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, right? You see so many board gamers sort of tick all the boxes of being a nerd, whereas I don't care for comic books particularly. I think Marvel movies are the most arid, pointless wastes of money that you can imagine. I like J.R.R. Tolkien, but I don't really read fantasy and sci-fi. It's this one area that really kind of stokes a passion in me.
Sure.
And yeah, and so it's funny, to be around people. I was on a podcast a couple of weeks ago, and they asked me what I thought about Andor. And I gave them a 10-minute monologue on why Star Wars and Marvel are ruining the world. And I don't think that was the answer they wanted, but it's more or less how I feel.
I bet they cut out that segment, didn't they?
No, it was in there. It was in there. All kept in. Respect
to that.
Indeed.
Well, you mentioned Pandemic. What are some other notable games along your board game journey?
So, Resistance Avalon was a really big one. I just, because that's really in my wheelhouse, lying and manipulating and shouting and using my little brain and my massive voice to sort of make people do what I want. So that's a real big one. I'm trying to think of the sort of Euro games that really, really inspired me. I think Lancaster by Matthias Kramer was a really big one. It's a wonderful game. Spirium by William Attier. It's a game that many people don't know. It's the guy who did Caylus, and it was kind of his follow-up to Caylus. And it's a wonderful medium-weight Euro game that is just, it because I played worker placement games before, and this felt like a further development of that mechanic, and it's super interesting, and it's exactly where I want a game to be. It's medium weight, it has really knotty decisions. You can knock it out in 90 minutes, and it is absolutely spectacular. Then my current favourite game, and what I think is the acme of the art form, actually, I don't think there's a game better, is Through the Ages. I think Through the Ages is simply, as a work, spectacular, and it's spectacular in all those great ways. So it functions brilliantly as a game. There's I've never played a game that engrosses me, or when I finish gives me that sort of sparkly feeling that you have after a great experience. But not only that, I think as an expression of the artist's intentions, it works really well, in the sense that, you're very clear on Vlaada Chvátil's view on communism, Vlaada Chvátil's view on religion, when you come out of the game. And then also as a game that sort of tells a story and puts sort of human history in sort of effortless perspective. It's absolutely astonishing. It's one of those games, and it's kind of unfortunate that it's so complex as a board game, because I think for a gamer it's fine, you get it after a while. But I think the thing with complex games is not that they're hard, you just need the motivation to want to learn how to play them,
and the time, for sure.
And the time, and I think Through the Ages is just, it should be appreciated by millions rather than thousands of people, I think. And then Le Havre by Uwe Rosenberg is just amazing. And then I think, No Thanks is just a mind-blowing, crystalline piece of design that is, as I say, you can take a card or put a chip on a card, and the sort of massive root system of decisions and stresses that come out and interactions that come out through that game is simply amazing. I think it's a lesson to any game designer, not that I'm a game designer, but it's a lesson to anyone about economy is so important in game design. I see so many games where you think you could cut a third of the rules here and the game would be fabulous, and then finally, I guess you've got to have a Knizia, and I would say modern art is Knizia's masterpiece. Knizia has this ability to sort of get in to people's brains and pull all the levers. He knows what motivates us, our venal sort of greed. And modern art does that better than anything he's designed. And it's an absolutely spectacular game, I think.
I have a confession to make. I don't know if I've played any Knizia games. I may have, and I just didn't realize that that's who was the designer.
It took me. When I got into board gaming, Knizia was kind of out of vogue at the time. Uwe Rosenberg was very much in vogue, and Knizia was out of vogue. And people were talking about Knizia, and I thought, I just don't get it. And I didn't play Knizia games for ages. And then it's only over the last sort of 3 or 4 years that I've sort of been discovering his back catalogue. And he's got so many games out there. And I would recommend to you, play High Society.
High Society.
High Society is brilliant. It's 20 minutes, and it's the best 20 minutes of your life. Play Modern Art. And if you can get a copy, play Stevenson's Rocket. I think Stevenson's Rocket might be the most underrated game out there. I think it's absolutely spectacular, and it's mean, and it's nasty, and yet it's classic Knizia, and then it has 5 rules, and the depth of gameplay is absolutely astonishing. So play those few games, and you can pick up High Society for, I don't know, $10-15. And
oh, okay.
It's brilliant. It's super simple, and it's really good.
All right. I wrote down each of those as you were speaking. I'm going to explore them on my own time.
Spend some money. You live in America. This is your role, your duty as an American.
I mean, even just the board game hobby itself, it's just spending money. Money that you don't have, money that you wish you had. Well, Ben, you're known for creating and hosting the 5 Games for Doomsday podcast. I'm going to assume that you have your own list of 5 games?
Yeah.
Would you like to run us through that list?
Absolutely not. Because,
all right.
Because if you go to patreon.com/5G4D, you can hear the show with which I go through them. And that's a Patreon backer perk, you see.
Excellent.
Because I'm nothing.
Well played.
I'm nothing if not a money-grubbing scumbag.
Well, our listeners who are interested, there you go. There's the link. That's the place. I'll ask a follow-up question instead then. Has that list changed over time for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm going to do another show. It's one of those things, right? I interview a lot of people for this show. And for people who are listening to this who don't know the premise, the idea is that there's been an apocalypse, you had to run to a cabin in the woods and can only take 5-year games with you. And then through those games, we go through the life of the creator, you know. And I get so many emails off people saying, you know, oh, I can't believe I left that off my list. And oh, if we'd have done the show today, it would be this. And it's inevitable, right? I think it's inevitable. I mean, think about the music you loved when you were young and the music you listen to now. I mean, there are overlaps. There are things that travel through life with you, but often your tastes change. And, you know, the idea for the show is cribbed from a British radio show called Desert Island Discs, where it's music and not games. What I liked about that sort of format is that I think the criteria for choice is different. It's not just, these are my 5 favourite games, right? Mm-hmm. It's a specific scenario. You know, you've got these 5 games for the rest of your life, potentially. And so why do you take them? And I think that prompts an interesting conversation, and the goal with the podcast really is to get to know the people, is to get an insight into who they are, not just what they produce. I mean, so many podcasts, and this is a good thing, I'm not slugging it off, but so many podcasts are about the here and now, the Kickstarter project that's coming up and all of that sort of stuff, and that's fine, but I felt like, and this sounds tremendously pretentious, but nevertheless.
Bring it. We can handle it here.
I felt like I wanted to do a podcast that was, to a certain extent, the podcast of record for this nascent industry, right? Because, you know, you think about Lawrence Stern, or you think about Cervantes, or you think about Shakespeare, and these are, you know, people whose legacy has echoed through the centuries, and because of the time it was and all of that sort of stuff, we don't know who they were. We've never heard their voices. And I think with something, I think the board game industry, especially sort of hobby games and games as an art form, is something that's in its infancy at the moment. And I think these wonderful pioneers, you know, get on the line with Reiner Knizia, and you realise that this man has, you know, been at the forefront of gaming, and it's through him that we have the games we have today. And my intention really was to get their voices on tape and to get a sort of comprehensive picture of who they were. And, you know, who knows what's going to happen, but I hope that in the future that it's useful for knowing who these people were, not just something to listen to now and digest and bin. And I don't know if I've succeeded, but that's kind of the purpose, I think.
Yeah, well, let me just say thank you for creating that, I guess, record of these legends that we can always come back to listen to.
Yeah, and I think Legends is right in certain cases. And I hope that gaming goes from strength to strength, and I hope in the way that computer games have now been kind of pretty much accepted across the board as legitimate works of art, I hope that happens to board games at some point in the future, because I think they are. And I hope that, you know, because there are, you know, I've interviewed Mark Herman, who's a living legend in war games. I've interviewed Reiner Knizia, Richard Garfield, all of these people who have crafted this thing that we have, and all of these people are responsible for so many sort of great nights we've had, you know.
Sure, yeah. Well, you mentioned, I'm sorry, what was it? Desert Island Discs was the British show? Beyond that, as the inspiration for 5 Games for Doomsday, were there any other concepts or themes that you were considering when first setting up the podcast? Well,
it was just, what I really wanted was to have a show that I could do myself. I mean, I think the podcast form shines when it's a conversation. And so I wanted to have, within limits, you know, sort of control over, well, control over everything, basically. What the jingle is at the beginning of the show, what gets kept in, what gets left out. And I'd done previous projects, and there had been issues with regards to just, and I'm not the world's best compromiser, right? And so I wanted to harness the sort of chatting form of the podcast, but I wanted it to be something that was essentially, I was the only fixture, because then I could control what the show was. And the interview format is perfect, and like it or not, sort of top 5, top 10 lists are super popular in the gaming world, and I love them. I watch them endlessly, and I thought it's a great format, but I didn't want to do something just straight. Get someone on and say, what are your top 5 favorite games? It's lots of people are doing that wonderfully elsewhere. And so, it was a combination of Desert Island Disc, but also a combination of sort of the prevailing board game media, and also an ability and a desire to do something that was just me, and also to get on the line with these people who I really admire,
You mentioned earlier people contacting you after the show saying, oh no, if I had known, I wish I would have added this game at this time. I love that, though, because that's exactly the scenario you're put in. If the apocalypse is going down and you can only pack a couple of games, 2 weeks later, you're not going to be able to come back and change your mind on which some of the games that you brought.
Absolutely. And, and I'm altogether too nice to the people on my show as well. The amount of people who just choose a pack of cards, which is absolutely cheating. Because you've got hundreds of games there, but sure. I always let them have it, because never forget that these people are giving up their time for you for free mostly.
I mean, you can build card houses with a deck of cards, though.
This is also true. It could be considered shelter too. Yeah,
throw them at enemies. So many uses.
Yeah.
But then again, so many good games have plenty of cards. You can do that anyway. So yeah, that's basically cheating.
Yeah, it is. Oh, absolutely cheating. Who did I have on recently? Klaus-Jürgen Wrede, the guy who did Carcassonne.
Yeah.
And his last choice was a game that doesn't exist, that he called Blanco Game, which is
a Blanco?
Just blank game components was his last choice. And it's
that's genius.
It's a complete cheat. It's an utter cheat. But,
But I mean, how are you going to make games otherwise, right?
Well, absolutely.
That's actually one of my favorite things to do. If there's ever a game that has superfluous components, or God forbid, there's a game that I decide to trash because I don't really want to sell it because it's not worth it, but there's good components. I love just collecting all those extra pieces and then using them for playtest designs and prototypes.
Yeah, I would love to. I would love to have the kind of ordered mind that would allow me to design board games. I've yet to hit on the golden idea, but yeah, I really admire people who design games, and it seems to me so out of my remit that I'm happy to consume.
Have you at least ever had any interest in that, or it's just something that's never really touched your radar?
Sure, I think every gamer has ideas knocking around their head about the game they would like to design, but I also think you should recognize your limits, right? Although saying that, I'm in the process of writing an RPG at the moment, which is a different thing, and I'm sort of lifting mechanisms wholly from other games, but I'm making the sort of setting and the sort of milieu around it my own. And that's interesting, and hopefully that'll become something,
Is this going to be a dice roller or some other mechanism of making tests?
So on my show, I have the interview shows, and then every other week I have an actual play journaling RPG show where I take a journaling RPG and then I sort of play it with. So the basic premise of journaling RPGs is you have some form of generating a prompt that's in the book, and it'll tell you what happens to you, and then you go away and you write a journal entry. And so what I've been doing, and it started with the 1,000-Year-Old Vampire, and I've played another couple of games since, what I do is I have the process of drawing the cards and playing them and talking with the audience about the ideas that I want to implement, and then I go away and I write the journal entry, and then I dramatize it, so I put sound effects on and music and all that sort of stuff. And so I've been playing those now for about a year, and And they have a really sort of robust core sort of system that you can lay other things on top of. And I had a great idea the other day, so I sort of wrote a page-long pitch sheet, and that's sort of... It's very embryonic at the moment, but...
Excellent.
Yeah,
is that going to appear on that podcast then?
Well, certainly. Well, the plan is, I think, at the end to run a Kickstarter for it.
Excellent.
And so, as part of the sort of publicity for the Kickstarter, I'll definitely do a playthrough on my own show. I mean, it'd be absolutely moronic not to, I think.
Well, keep an eye out for that. I'd love to play an RPG by the one and only Ben Maddox.
The one and only, thankfully.
Yes. I think I was trying to find your board game Geek user, and there were a couple of Ben Maddoxes, and it was a little confusing.
Oh, it's interesting.
That's okay. Yeah.
There's a couple. Let's have a look. So for the listeners now, I'm looking on Board Game Geek. Let's have a look. It's a very usable website.
If you don't use it, you may need to question your existence as a gamer.
There's 3 Ben Maddoxes. No, mine's the one with the aggressive guy with their fingers up.
That's what I thought, yeah.
Yeah, that's me. That's me.
Well, you've mentioned a couple of your other audio ventures. Let's talk about Design Notes, working with the Dice Tower. How did that come about?
Yeah, so I was watching Tom do a Q&A. And I'd had Tom on the show, and I knew he was a listener to the show, and I knew he was a fan of the show. And he said something about, we want to have more guests on our top 10 lists and stuff. So I just sent him an email saying, hey, can I come on and do a top 10 list? And he said yes. And so we did the top 10 list, and we obviously did it virtually and everything. And then afterwards, when we finished, Tom said, "Oh, Ben, could you stick around after everyone's left, please?" And I'm thinking, oh my God, did I drop an F-bomb live on the Dice Tower or something? What have I done? And he said to me, "I want to have an interview show on the Dice Tower. I think you're really good at it. Would you like to do it?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And he said, "Come up with a concept and pitch it to me." And so obviously I didn't want to cannibalize my own show particularly. And one thing I think, so my show is very general. It's about the whole lives of these people. And I get into it a bit, but I don't really get into it deeply, the sort of process of how these people get games to the table. Or I've interviewed artists, how they draw specifically for games, or how they publish. The process of getting games to the table basically was the general idea. And so then, having done Five Games for Doomsday for nearly 5 years now, I have a lot of people's email addresses. So I just sent them emails saying, "Hey, I'm doing this Dice Tower thing. It's going to be like 30 minutes. Would you come on and do it?" And I've had loads of great people come on and do it. And I think it's a really interesting look into... It's much more about the process of designing games and how people get from an idea to having a game on the table. And I think it's interesting for board games, but it's also interesting just to talk about the creative process in general, I think.
Sure. Have you gotten the chance to have Jay Cormier on the show yet? Jay Cormier, my interview for 5 Games for Doomsday is sitting on unedited at the moment on my hard drive, so that will be coming up.
Okay. At some point in the next couple of months, I think.
Okay, because I know he's something of a guru with the whole playtesting and design world. He even has that the Kickstarter that came out recently, or maybe it was a couple of years ago, the Fail Faster Journal.
Right.
I'd love to hear some more of his some input.
Yeah, fascinating
on the design
stuff.
process.
And I think board gaming. I think the physical nature of board gaming, it being actual physical objects, will mean that there's a limit on its growth, right?
Sure.
And I think that's not a terrible thing, because it's still board gaming still feels like a community now, and I think people feel like they can impart advice. I mean, good example, when I had this idea for this RPG, I wrote to a guy I know who writes journaling RPGs, and I just said, "Hey, look, could you give over an hour of your time to give me some advice?" And he wrote back and said, "Yeah, we can get together and I can help you." And I think it's wonderful. There's none of this sort of, teeth-bared competitiveness in board gaming, and I hope it remains collegiate, even though it gets more and more professionalized day upon day, I think.
Yeah, I hope so too. I mean, the market is definitely becoming fairly saturated, you might say, but not to the point where good games can't be discovered.
Sure.
So it seems like
absolutely.
we're in a good balance right now.
I think with any art form, right, most of it's not very good. Some of it's good, and then a very small amount of it is great. And I think board games are no exception. There's so many sort of, and with Euro games, you go to Essen, and there's so many nondescript Euro games, with sheep meeples that come out every year, and only very few of them are great. But, that's the nature of the beast, and it's enjoyable finding them,
Yeah, I think that's a great reason why Kickstarter has been implemented so much and why I think it's so popular is it sort of gives the power back to the fans, because a lot of people can just decide, is this game worthy of production, in a sense? And it's not absolute, because I'm sure there's a lot of good games that maybe just weren't advertised as well and should have been produced, but still.
I mean, the fundamental problem with Kickstarter, though, is it's become two things now. It's become a mini store, or it's become a pre-order place for, big companies. And it's understandable. You minimize so much risk, but the problem is, I think the requirement when I got into gaming was when Kickstarter was first starting to be a thing in board games, and it was a lot more risky back then, but the standard for entry was so much lower. You could have an idea and allow the community to help you realize that idea. Now, to put a board game on Kickstarter, you need to have everything in place. You need to have pretty much the game done, the graphic design in place, the art in place. It is not the sort of windmill of dreams that it's painted at. But what I will say is that there are a lot of games that wouldn't be out now if it wasn't for Kickstarter, and a lot of people who've made their careers in Kickstarter. And I think, by and large, it's a good thing, but it's not this wonderful egalitarian place of creativity anymore.
Sure. Yeah, well, like I said, especially if you haven't had the greatest advertising campaign, or maybe you just happen to be releasing the Kickstarter at the same time that another very similar game is coming out, you can have a lot of production issues for sure.
Sure, and you need to. I think you probably need $5 to $10,000 for a board game Kickstarter up front, because you need to pay the artist, you need to pay the graphic designer, and quite right too. They should be paid. So yeah, it's difficult. I think the RPG community is still a little bit more sort of ad hoc in many ways, but yeah, I mean, there's lots of great games that have come out in Kickstarter, and lots of awful ones too.
Oh, for sure. I've gotten a few of those. I've got some horror stories for sure. But I won't embarrass anyone on the show. That's not what we're here for.
No! Name names!
Oh. Well, I guess I said multiple. I've received a lot of Kickstarters. The only one I've actually backed is Era of Kingdoms. Are you familiar with this one?
I'm not.
It's by Michael Arisman, I believe. So I have mixed feelings about this. I can realize in retrospect that it's not necessarily a bad game, but I was early on getting into the board game, the hobby community, and this was the first Kickstarter that I'd ever backed, and it was marketed as a combination of Dominion and Catan, and at that time, like, those were the two games I really knew. So I was like, oh, this is awesome, and I got my friend who's actually a co-host on this show, but he's off doing other stuff right now. We can talk about that later. I got him in on it, and we both purchased a copy. We actually purchased a tier where you can name one of the cards, and so I still have that card that we named in the game. And then I played it, and my hopes just slowly just went down. The problem with it, I think, was just and we've already talked about this actually multiple times in previous episodes of the show. But when you're using resources in a game, like take Catan, for example, the resources should have different functions. Yeah. So, or in Catan, that's going to be used for your developmental stages, but then wood and brick, that's how you get established on the map in the first place. But in this game, there are 4 different resources, but all of them, they might as well have just been A, B, C, and D. They function exactly the same way.
Well, if they're
there was
functionally
no interest.
identical, why have you got 4 resources?
Exactly. Yeah, that was my question. You have a card that requires 2 of one kind of resource, and then a different card that requires 2 of a different kind of resource. And all that was really different between them was the name, and not really the function in any way. But anyway, I've trashed Era of Kingdoms too much at this point. My apologies, Michael Arisman. I'm sure you're a great designer, and I will keep looking for games by you.
Well, this is the issue. I think Kickstarter can end up. Well, the thing is, I think Kickstarter, there's no kind of endorsement there, right? If you look at it, the wonderful thing about going through the publishing route, I think, is that it's seen by a lot of eyes. And that can knock interesting carbuncles off the design, but also it's this idea that a number of people have signed off on it, so it's going to have a minimum level of quality.
Agreed.
Hope, I think.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you go to a publisher and I think the first thing they say to you is, these resources are functionally identical. Why do we have different resources? And that's the first thing they would say, I would assume, right?
Huh. But you don't necessarily have to have a publisher lined up before doing a Kickstarter, right? You can.
No. I mean, I think that's the point, right? I think a lot of people go, this is the best game in the world. And you often see things like that in Kickstarter games because no one's vetting it, essentially.
I see. So that's the advantage of approaching a publisher first as opposed to crowdfunding.
Yeah, because they employ people whose job it is to knock those edges off the game, to make the game a professional standard thing, I think.
Well, Ben, you've interviewed quite a few pillars, I might say, of the board game community over the years. Is there anyone, I mean, I don't want to make this like too spicy or hurt anyone's feelings, but do you have some favorite people that you've interviewed over the years?
Well, favorites are a difficult thing. I mean, and this is, I'm not going to name names here, but there are certain people who you get on a line with and you instantly have a connection and you get along with, and there are certain people who you don't. And you come off the call thinking, I probably wouldn't want to sit around a table and have a drink with that person. And that's fine. I think that's the nature of human interaction, right? But there are, I was surprised with Reiner Knizia, and his name comes up a lot. Sure. But I was expecting when I interviewed him for him to be quite dry, quite German, and quite kind of unengaging. And it was a great interview. He's a really interesting guy, and he really has interesting viewpoints on things. And so it was a great interview to do. And I recently, because I've been going 5 years, I've started releasing classic episodes. And I interviewed Mark Herman, and I found out going into the interview that Mark Herman had worked in the same company as Edward Snowden.
Really?
And so I thought I'd ask Mark Herman about Edward Snowden and his views on Edward Snowden, and I fully expected him to, give it a straight bat and say, I'm not really comfortable on commenting. And not only did he comment, he gave me a 10-minute monologue on his views on it. It was fabulous. Really, really great stuff. So there's loads of really, really the people, I guess. People ask, how do you do good interviews? And I think part of it is I find people endlessly fascinating. And most people, if you ask them the right questions, will reveal their fascinating sides. And so
that's the trick, isn't it? Trying to figure out what to ask.
Yeah. And I think, I'm a fairly basic human being. So I ask the questions that I'm interested in the hope that everyone else who listens will be interested in the answers,
I think that's a good approach. It seems like I guess it's worked okay for you over time.
Yeah, sure.
Well, are there any particular people that you maybe have written down on a list somewhere that you just haven't been able to nab for an interview yet?
Sure. I want to do Christian Peterson, the old head of Fantasy Flight. And he's basically said no to me. as has Klaus Teuber, which is a shame, because Klaus Teuber, I've done Richard Garfield, and I've done Reiner Knizia. I would love to do Klaus Teuber, and I'd love to do Alan Moon. And I will get Alan Moon at some point, I'm sure. It's just a matter of getting hold of him. I want to do... The person I really want to do, who's you can see has just sort of fallen into board gaming hard, is Trey Parker. I really want to get him on because I've been a Trey Parker fan for years. And... I'm just too nervous to ask Tom if he can give me his email address, because I'm sure he'll tell me no, unfortunately.
Oh, no. Maybe you should get Yes, you just need to get a petition out there.
Yeah, I'll get a petition.
A few hundred people, a few thousand people even.
I'm not sure there's a few thousand people out there who'd sign it, but you never know. You never know. I assume he's
Depends
not
who you market to.
I assume he's not on Twitter. I don't think anyone's on Twitter anymore.
think they've all moved over to Instagram, it seems like.
And Mastodon, apparently.
Mastodon?
Yeah, it's a new social network site, and it's you can see that it was done by computer developers because it's really arcade and difficult. And I tried, and I just went, nah.
I've never even heard of that. Wow.
Yeah, it's the thing now, Mastodon.
Huh. Well, Ben, are there any other projects or ventures we might expect to be seeing from you in the future, either soon or later?
Well, you can play My Father's Work. I do the voices for the app on My Father's Work, which is great, actually. You know, I've got a vested interest. I'm biased, of course, but I was really surprised. I've known TC for years, the designer of the game, and it's really good. I played it the other day. It's really good. There's an instructional app for the new Catan game. I'm not doing the voice, but I did the translation. So if you think the English is clunky, you can send me an email and tell me I can't write. I write for Tabletop Gaming Magazine in the UK.
Okay.
I'm their agony aunt, and also I write reviews for them. So they pop up every month. What else? Oh, I did the voiceover for the Unconscious Minds Kickstarter video, which is currently on Kickstarter as we record, though probably not when this is released. But you can go back and watch the video and hear me do a terrible German accent.
Ben, if I ever do a Kickstarter, I'd love for you to voice over it.
Oh, yes, and I'm very cheap, so it shouldn't be an issue. And yeah, that's it. And if anything else comes up, then I'm at 5 Games for Doomsday on Twitter. I might announce it, though I'm terrible on social media.
Okay. Well, for our listeners who might want to explore and support your work further beyond that website, is there anywhere else that you would direct them? Yes,
you can go to 5gamesfordoomsday.com. That's got all the shows on it. And just look 5 Games for Doomsday on Google and go to the Spreaker website because I've changed podcast hosts recently. And so some of the links are dead and I haven't finished them yet. And I'm on Instagram, 5 Games for Doomsday, Twitter, 5 Games for Doomsday, Facebook, 5 Games for Doomsday, all of that sort of horrendous stuff. And yeah, listen to the show. I think it's good. And I think the RPG shows don't get the numbers that the interview shows get, which is completely understandable, but I think the RPG shows are really good. And I do acting on it and sound editing and that. So
I have some hope for the RPG shows because it seems like that, even if it has a small following that starts out, it can become a cult following and people just love to continue to come back and keep listening.
Well, this is the hope. Come back, keep listening, open wallets.
Well, Ben, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you working with me with very different time zones to make this podcast happen.
Yeah, no worries. That was great.
Thanks for tuning in, folks. This has been the Tabletop Shop podcast featuring our special guest, Ben Maddox, creator and host of the 5 Games for Doomsday podcast. If you enjoyed this content and want to see more, please leave us a like and hit that subscribe button, and maybe even leave a comment to let us know what other special guest you'd like to see on the show. Thanks for stopping by the shop.